So what on earth is happening in Sudan? Reports are that over 400 people have been killed and more than 3,500 wounded since two rival Sudanese generals began fighting for control of the country. But that news became all the more real with the latest announcement from the State Department over the weekend that circumstances on the ground remain too dangerous to authorize a large-scale military evacuation of U.S. citizens inside Sudan. What that means, according to reports, that as many as 16,000 Americans are stranded inside an increasingly war-torn nation. U.S. News and World Reports is estimating upwards of 19,000 Americans. Obviously, many are likening this to the Kabul disaster all over again.
4 embassies, not even in 3 years of a presidency. And it seems that every single time the story is the same, some stupid form letter goes out from the State Department telling Americans abroad, hey, just like hunker down, shelter in place. Meanwhile, we're evacuating State Department personnel as opposed to having our military secure our embassy so Americans can find safe haven to be able to get out of these hotspots. You know, last time I checked, we don't leave people behind. But Joe Biden has now become an expert of doing this with Anthony Blinken being in charge of the State Department.
That's the great Representative Byron Donalds of Florida. So with as many as 16 or 19,000 Americans trapped inside Sudan, the question that we all need to wrestle with is, what the heck is going on? What's happening in Sudan? And unfortunately, as we probe for answers, we're going to uncover an all too familiar pattern of a globalist empire desperately clinging to power. Hey gang, I just had a great interview with Andrew Krabuchet, CEO of RedBalloon. RedBalloon is the nation's leading anti-woke job board, and Andrew is leading the charge against the force-fed liberal culture in so many pathetic workplaces. Now, RedBalloon is hosting a free training on Thursday, May 4th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and the topic is how to find values-aligned job seekers in today's woke world. People who will build your company culture, not tear it down. It's for both employers and those looking to work in a conservative environment. And here's the best part. Andrew agreed to waive the fee for our listeners to attend. That's a $250 value, absolutely free for each and every one of you. If you want to learn how you can keep the culture war out of your business, click on that link below and sign up for this free training. But seating is limited, so don't wait. Click on that link right now, and let's together build a patriot economy dedicated to faith, family, and freedom. Click on that link and check them out at RedBalloon.work. What's happening on the ground in Sudan is a clash between two factions of the Sudanese military that's been very well summarized by my colleague Conrad Franz in an article on TurleyTalks.com. So on the one side, you have the Sudanese armed forces, and they're being led by the Sudanese army chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. He's the de facto leader of Sudan, which he's been since the Sudanese revolution back in 2019. On the other side, you have a paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Paramilitary militias are very common in Sudan, and this one is led by the Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan. Now, in the midst of all of this, there are reports that the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum, the capital, had an unusually large staff, on par with its staff in Kiev, which is completely disproportionate to the extent to which the U.S. and Sudan have any diplomatic or economic ties, which has long led to the speculation that the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum is a key intelligence outpost. Regardless, the U.S. has long relied on alliances with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Coast countries to maintain geopolitical stability in the Sudanese region and keep encroaching influences of Russia and China at bay. Unfortunately for the Biden administration, nations like Saudi Arabia have increasingly begun to turn their back on the United States and align themselves precisely with Russia and China, as we saw in the recent rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran brokered by China. At the same time, the current Sudanese government, headed by al-Burhan, is currently pursuing a plan to build a large Russian naval base in the Red Sea. As such, Russia would join forces with China, that also has a massive Red Sea naval base in neighboring Djibouti. Now, the U.S. State Department has been putting a lot of pressure on Sudan over the last year, not to go ahead with building the Russian naval base. But back in February of this year, the Sudanese government did in fact confirm that they were going to go ahead and build the Russian naval base. A month later, Victoria Nuland, of all people, the very person behind the Maidan Revolution in Kiev in 2014, the very same person who warned that the Nord Stream pipeline, or Nordstrom's pipeline, if you're a White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, she's the same one who made it clear last year that the Nord Stream pipeline would not be allowed to continue. That very same Victoria Nuland traveled to Sudan to, quote, discuss bringing back democracy to the nation. And lo and behold, just weeks after she left, the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary RSF exploded. So needless to say, there are many very skeptical observers out there saying that this all fits a rather strange, predictable pattern here. Now, in fairness, Sudan has been in a state of civil war for years, resulting in the secession of South Sudan, which gained its independence back in 2011. And the warring generals here have been vying for leadership positions in the impending new government for some time now. In fact, the Foreign Policy Journal actually largely faults the U.S.'s failure to effectively broker an integrative alliance between the armed forces and the RSF as the catalyst for the fighting. But beyond that, there does seem to be a familiar pattern working itself out here. You have a government in a third world nation that refuses to cooperate with the dictates of D.C. against Russia. And just like the original pro-Russian government in Kiev, they suddenly find themselves in the midst of a conveniently timed revolution that, of course, aims to disrupt the goals of their current government that would have accommodated Russian military interests. And already we're seeing D.C. wage the propaganda war that Russia's involvement in the region may indeed require American intervention. So as my colleague Conrad summarizes, the conflict in Ukraine, which is ultimately all about the West desperately trying to maintain the liberal world order in the face of Russia and China's multipolar rise, that conflict is spilling out into larger regional conflicts and dragging African nations into the fold. So obviously we'll keep an eye on how things develop here in the Sudan, but there's no question the Biden administration appears all in on desperately trying to hold on to an old world order that is inevitably dying away. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You'll definitely want to check out my latest video on Bill Maher getting red-pilled on black crime. You got to check this out. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.